what folks are, if there's any questions about fall gardening before we jump in, and we can make sure we try to get to them. If you have any pressing questions about what you should be doing now, what are you thinking about in your garden right now? Anything you want to throw on the chat, and we can, just start with some conversation, I think. Yep. What should I do with the containers? We'll talk about that. Got a whole slide on that, Lauren.
Okay, yeah, well, we can talk about low tunnels.
Ah, yes. Is that Gary Gray? Is that Lauren's father? Trying to catch up with you. Where should I plant my garlic? Okay, good. Yep, yep. This is a great class for newer gardeners. A lot of the content is geared toward new folks. If you've been around in the Garden Resource Program for a while, you probably know some of this information, and I'd love for you to chime in on your experiences. I'm always down for that. Oh, large tree, okay. It's a good question, Catherine.
Okay, well, we should definitely, I'll maybe read through these as we're going to make sure that we get them in the recording for folks. So I guess we can keep the questions coming. Maybe we could go ahead and get started, and then I can prime. I'll make sure that we're kind of addressing these as we go.
Yeah, sounds good. All right, so welcome to Fall Garden Maintenance. It's the time of the year where, you're kind of like, what do I do now? Especially if you're a new gardener. We want to give you some tips on, best practices in the garden at this time of year. So feel free to jump in the chat with questions, and we'll keep going. So just kind of an overview. We all know that at this time of the year, we're getting less sunlight, we're getting, colder weather. But just, as we're looking at this topic, wanted to just show you kind of what the sun is doing right now. I'm not sure if, everybody realizes like how the sun dips down dramatically to the south in the winter months. So by the end of December, it's pretty low in the sky. And that's why you hear people say, if you have house plants or if you're doing some indoor growing, to stick things in the southern window. When you orient your garden, you're kind of mindful of the south side, because toward this time of the year, you're going to get more sunlight coming from the south. So here's some of the things we're going to be talking about today. Just an overview of kind of things you should be thinking about right now, what's going on in October. We're going to talk about, thinking about garden design at this time of the year, some tips on starting new beds even this time of the year. Looking at still planting some things, what can be planted right now. When to harvest, when to pull out your old crops, planting some perennials, talking about some perennials, and just a little primer for some indoor gardening for folks. So it's kind of an overview of what we'll be talking about. I get this question quite a bit, like, when do I stop planting things? What can I plant? When can I plant it? And generally, things are gonna stop growing in your garden around mid-November. And so when you're looking at, can I still get a round of something in? We're right at the cusp. I would say, you may get a round of like lettuce in there, baby lettuce, right now. But most of the things that you put in like late September, you might want to consider doing some season extension on that stuff. We'll talk a little bit about that. So things that you planted in late September, protecting them with the quick hoops or the row cover. If you are planning on overwintering things, so overwintering just means you're letting them go through a dormant phase in the winter, and you're going to plan to harvest them in February. So some people may put in a crop late September. This might be your last window to put something in, and so that it gets to a certain size by November. It goes through a dormant phase, and then you're once we get more sunlight, once we're getting about 10 hours of sunlight during the day, those things will start to pop back alive. We're also planting your flowering bulbs. So folks who are into their perennial gardens, their flower gardens, get a round of tulips. We just passed out daffodils in honor of the COVID victims this year. You want to get those in before that deep frost. So this month, and you have through probably mid-November, early December to get those things in. And just a reminder, even though it seems really kind of cold and wet outside, making sure that you water those in. And then now is also the time where we're planting garlic for the next kind of 2 weeks. We have like a little window here before the frost sets in. Actually, the frost is a little early this year. I feel like the first frost is, I think they said it was October 4th in the almanac. But anyway, I'm gonna pause my screen because Keto has a little video on planting garlic that they did at the farm that he's gonna share from his screen. So let's switch out, Keto. We can share that garlic video.
Uh-huh.
Hi, my name is Lola. I'm at KGZ Farm. So we're getting ready for garlic planting season. We're going to talk a little bit about what that looks like. So you want to plant garlic as the temperature is starting to cool down. You don't want it to be so hot that the cloves sprout prematurely, but you also don't want it to be so cold that the ground is frozen. So typically we like to plant at the beginning of October. Garlic needs a bit of a cool period so it can hang out in the ground before it sprouts. And then in June, you'll see what we call garlic steaks emerge, which are super tasty. They taste like garlic, but a little bit more mild than garlic cloves themselves. And you'll know that those are ready to be harvested when they've developed a crook neck. And harvesting those actually promotes bulb growth. Then in about July, you'll know that the garlic is ready to be harvested when the two bottom leaves have dried out. So we have a couple of tools that we like to use to plant garlic cloves. This is what we call a dibbler. It has 5 bolts on it, and we like this because we make multiple holes at a time. when you plant the cloves, you're going to want to make sure that they are 4 to 6 inches apart, about 2 inches. So you're going to separate the head of garlic into cloves. And when you plant, you want the root to be facing down, and then the pointy side to be facing up. I use the dibbler. And then after you plant the cloves, it's a good idea to put straw down, which acts as a buffer so that the ground doesn't heat the cloves up during the winter time. But it also helps stay on top with the straw helps to stay on top of weeding because if you have lots of weeds, that takes energy and nutrients away from the garlic itself. And you want the heads to grow nice and big, so you want to.
Yeah, the must have been doing some construction at the farm that day.
Yeah.
The sound was kind of grainy, but let's review some of the things for specific, especially for the new folks on garlic. So Keto, you might speak a little bit more to the history of that variety. I know
Yeah.
that we've been growing that variety for, I know more than 5 years, almost 10 years in the city.
Yeah. So garlic is a really great crop, an easy crop to, hold on, let me just, I want to stop sharing. How do I stop sharing?
Oh, if on that black bar, there's, should say stop sharing.
New share, pause share, stop share. There you go. Okay.
Mhm.
So garlic is really great for to be kind of self-sustainable. It's one of those things in terms of seed saving, or being able to have a local resource that does not need to be cultivated outside of the city. It's a really great seed saving crop because we've been saving this variety, like T said, for at least 10 years. We're calling it Motown now, but the original variety name is Music. So that was kind of the inspiration, being in the Detroit base. And so, yeah, from season to season, basically what we do at the KGD farm is we grow out a field of garlic. So I don't know if you remember, T, but I think we had 1,500 plus bulbs that we pulled out this year.
Wow.
So, and then each one of those bulbs has got 4 to 6 cloves in it. And then we sort it by size. We keep the best ones we distribute or the medium grade ones we distribute for GRP members. The best grade ones we use for seed to grow out for next year for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's garlic.
Yeah. Only thing I would add is that it's a hardneck variety, which is really good for our weather here. A lot of the garlic that you get in the grocery store is soft neck. Although Lottie says she planted some and she got some.
Yeah.
So.
What I think they say that hardneck varieties are a little more hardy, winter hardy.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a mild winter, then soft might be fine. But if it was a harsh winter, then softneck might not do so great.
Yeah.
There's a few questions here about the garlic. So is there a problem planting bulbs in mid-October? No, just like, and I'm sorry, it sounded like there was a little bit of sound issue with that video. So we're maybe need to redo that, but we'll make it work. And so it's a resource for folks. But short of it is, garlic needs a vernal period, they call it, which is a cold, you know, a time in the ground during the winter being cold. And as long as we get them in the ground before the ground freezes, then that's totally fine.
In fact, pushing it a little bit later is sometimes good because you don't want it to get you don't want to get so warm that it starts to sprout right now.
Right. Right. There has been a few years where, you know, people were planting in October, and then we got an Indian summer where we got a few series of warm days late fall, and the garlic sprouted, which is probably not the end of the world, but it, you know, does, you know, we don't really want them to sprout until next season. That's going to be the best for those plants.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And just a couple more things about garlic. It's a, you know, it's a super long, you have a super long, if you didn't hear Lola, you have a super long growing season on the garlic. So you're planting it now, but you're not harvesting necessarily. You're going to harvest some parts of it in June. You're going to harvest, they get these little curly scapes that come up from the top that people chop up, kind of like green onions or something like that. You can harvest those around June, and then in you know, July, mid-July to late July, you'll be when the leaves start to die back, you'll be harvesting the actual bulb. So you're gonna plant one little piece of garlic, and it's gonna turn into a bulb in that 9 months. And you definitely want to cover it with straw, is what she was saying at the end. So you want to keep your beds covered with straw because it's so long. You don't want to have to be fighting the weeds in the spring. Anything else you might have said that
Yeah.
I can't?
So there's a question from Gary about soil type. I would say it just, nothing too special. I mean, just, you know, just like most, as long as you're growing other vegetables that are doing fine in that space, or you know, you can't, you definitely need soil that is got some nutrients in it. You know, it's got the addition of compost and things, and but no real special thing. I mean, you know, adding compost anytime you plant is what we always recommend. But other than that, no real special stuff.
Yeah, it pokes up.
Yeah, the question is, there's a question, does the garlic poke up through the straw, or do you need to remove it? No, that's specifically why we recommend the straw, because it, you know, because of the way that the straw lays on the top of it, it allows that. So where in theory any mulch would work, like, you know, shredded leaves, you could do that. But, you know, shredded leaves tend to mat a little bit, which could cause problems with that. There's a question about how thick you want to put down the straw. A couple, 2, 3, 4 inches, you know, however you can manage, but at least a good, you know, couple layers, you know, a couple inches deep. All right, so keep going on the slides, or should we start going through? Okay, great.
Mm-hmm. Yep. All right. So we talked about, you know, things we want to plant. Let's talk about things we want to remove right now. So right now, my tomatoes are kind of looking like this. Your tomatoes are probably starting to look like this. In the fall, we want to harvest all your, you know, what they call it, tender greens. So, you know, go ahead and get all of your, you know, softer greens, your mustards, your arugula, your like that little all greens mix that you kind of want to harvest. I get that now. You can leave your kale, leave your collards. A lot of times you can be harvesting those into December. So, but the softer greens, remove those. go ahead and harvest all your hot crops right now. So before, the frost comes in the first couple weeks in October, we start to get our first frost in Michigan. And when that first frost comes in, that fruit is gonna, just like if you were to take the tomato and put it in a freezer, is gonna make the fruit mushy. So go ahead and get all your tomatoes. And I just told Keto, as soon as we get off this call, I'm going out in the backyard, I'm collecting all my tomatoes. And what I like to do is I'll throw them on my, because a lot of them will still be green right now. I throw them on my windowsill, and within a couple of days, they're ripening up, and I have a whole nother harvest of tomatoes. Uh, Folks, when they're, flowers for your fruit and crops will likely not develop. So if you still have flowers on your fruit and crops, it's getting too cold. They're not going to develop into fruit. So it's time to yank that whole plant out. So you're going to harvest all your tomatoes. Oh, bless you. And then you're going to actually pull the plant out of the ground. And I like to chop mine up finely and throw them into my compost pile behind the garage. That's going to be better on your compost pile. Also, at this point, for me, Keto, and so for folks who are new to gardening is, there's all kind of way, everybody has their own way of doing things. So, feel free to experiment and enjoy it and learn each year. So for me, toward this time of year, a lot of my spring greens are getting pretty crusty with bugs and things like that. So I planted another round of greens about a month ago when we did the fall crops, or maybe 2 months ago now. And I'm gonna yank out my spring greens that I've still been harvesting off of. So if you have things that are, dying back and are full of pests, go ahead and yank those out. I'm actually gonna put my garlic where the greens were, my spring greens. Your sweet potatoes, it's time for those to come out, and your squash. Remember that sweet potatoes and squash need to be cured. So if you're if you're going to store them over the winter, you want to take your time and do a process what they call curing it. And that is for the sweet potatoes and squash, putting them at a higher degree, so near your furnace, or some people put them someplace where it's hotter in your house. You want it at a higher humidity, and you just want to let it stay out for about 10 years before you put them into storage. 10 years, 10 days, sorry. Don't leave them out for 10 years. Don't do that. For about 10 days, 7 to 10 days. And then after you've cured them, you can go ahead and store them in a cool, kind of dry place, like maybe the basement. Do you have any thoughts on curing, or is there any questions on curing? And that's kind of if you're new to gardening, that's something kind of different. I know you like to do the root cellaring. Are you doing that at your house, root cellaring?
We have a room in the basement that kind of functions that way. It's like, but I'm going to hold that thought for 1 second. So one, I want to make sure that everybody, we're going to get to all your questions in the chat here. Can you please, when you're writing into the chat, please make sure that you're addressing all panelists and attendees. We'll just do a click down so everybody else can see your questions. That helps, share the information with the group. So that's that. And then relating to curing, the idea of a root cellar is that the earth at below ground, or at below 2 feet, keeps a constant of about 50 degrees year round. So it's a space in most of us have basements, and so if you have a room or a space in your basement or a corner of your basement, that usually can consistently stay at that temp, and that's a great place to store like things that we call storage crops. So like if you grew potatoes and you let them cure so the skins on them got dried, and so they're storage ready. So potatoes, onions, squashes, garlic. So lots of those things. That's another kind of method of quote unquote season extension, where we're being able to grow these things earlier in the year and then put them downstairs for storage, or put them in the root cellar for storage for use during the winter months. Um, I also wanted to say that, in addition to putting tomatoes on your windowsill, if you have lots of them, one way to kind of try and accelerate the curing is to put them in a paper bag, because they give off what ethylene gas, which helps. So they naturally give off ethylene gas, which helps them ripen. So that's another way to think about it.
One thing I thought of when you were talking, that folks who are new may not know, the sweet potatoes and squash, when you harvest those, you don't necessarily need to like vigorously wash them off. I just take an old towel and brush the dirt off then I cure them, because you actually want them to dry out, and instead of getting more moisture on them.
Yeah. And you don't want to disrupt you want that skin on the outside to get dry without any kind of mixer damage, and that's what helps preserve it and prevent rot.
A couple final points I had on this one is just to be mindful of the Detroit Urban Ag Ordinance. The language there is dead garden plants must be removed regularly, and in any instance, no later than November 30th. This is a point that we are, kind of negotiating and talking to the city about, because there are people who overwinter their things or are saving seed. So it may look like, dead plants, but it's really an attempt to save some seed over the winter, or doing some self-seeding stuff. In any case, I felt like it was my duty to let you know that that's in the ordinance, because I have actually seen some people get blight tickets for leaving their plants out, particularly community gardens who are out in the open, just keeping it tidy, as we kind of work with the city on what they want to see in these spaces. And then encouraging, I'm always like on a mission to encourage people to just even, dip your toe into saving seed. There's a number of ways to do it. We just did a class on it a few weeks ago with Akello, and that is on the class is on our website. All of our archive classes you can find on the website under the education tab. As we're building a kind of our mission is a food sovereign city, we will need people to have seed reserves. So something to think about. Actually, this year, Keto, I'm just gonna talk to you about it. I was trying this method. You tell me what you think here. I took all my jalapeno peppers, and you're cooking them. I just sliced in half, and I just dried them out with the seeds in there like that. Instead of trying to remove them, and I just dried them out like that, because last year I found a bunch of old jalapenos that I never harvested, or they fell into the ground, and they reseeded themselves just like that. So I just sliced them in half and dried them, and that's how I'm gonna try to save those seeds.
Yeah, right on. Right on.
Yeah.
I mean, and then in short, there's a lot more information to seed saving, so do check out that video with Akello.
Yeah.
But I mean, to T's point, there is that it's got to be a mature fruit. Just know that. In this case, the jalapenos were mature and ripe, whereas cucumbers, for instance, the way we typically know to eat them, those aren't quite mature. So a little tidbit on seed saving, but we're not going to go into depth on that. Maybe we could go to the questions a little bit here.
Sure.
Yep. What's a hard frost? There was a frost warning last night.
Yeah, we had an early frost this year. It was for October 4th, which is tomorrow, right? Um, so for, when I say hard frost, I'm talking about as we get into the later November, December, when the ground is freezing. And then when I'm talking about first frost, I'm talking the mid-October. So that's
Yeah.
my thought around it. But
The frost, like the first frost, is like a marker for anything that's gonna die or is sensitive to frost. It's like a marker, like on your calendar. You should be sure and deal with those plants before this first frost. And that's like it's based on an average of over the past 100 years of the first day that we had a frost. That's where that date comes from. So we may or may not see a frost on October 4th, but it's just a general marker like, okay, if you have frost sensitive things, probably should deal with them before that time. Okay, clicking down the list here. In terms of chopping up your tomato plants, like, do you have any specific recommendations? Like how do you do it? Like, do you how long are they, or what kind of strategy for that?
Yeah, no, I don't get too specific with it, but I just take my pruners and I chop that main stalk up that gets a little thick. And I was have a little slide on your compost pile, and just that a recommendation of like making it easier for your compost pile to break it down by chopping it up for it instead of throwing it in whole. Is what I do.
Okay. Cassandra mentioned that zucchini and squash can also be taken up now. Yep. So any of those hot crops. Can you grow garlic in raised beds or containers?
Yes, I've definitely done raised beds. In fact, mine are growing in raised beds today or in a couple of days, as soon as I clear out my greens.
Right on. I'm interested in making sure my crops like cilantro and mustard greens and arugula that go to seed aren't disrupted too much as I prepare my garden in the fall. Yeah, you got to work around those things. I mean, but you should know, and again, we're kind of getting into, there's a little more detail here, but those things are going to be, if you're saving seed, you want to save seed from those things. If you haven't seen the flowers already, in the development of the seed heads, they may not, basically they're annual seeders. All three of those will seed in the first season. And they are all pretty reasonable to save seed from, but they need to go through their entire life cycle by this point in the season by now to be able to, for you to be getting some seed off of them. So if you don't see that yet, then you may not be able to get seed off of those. Which of the late spring plants that you gave out can seeds be collected from? Man, there are lots of interested seed saving here. Well, in theory, all of them, but some of them are biennial, like collards and kale, for instance, need to go through a cold period, and then they would be seeding in the next year. But I'm going to leave it there. We'll say this: there's a really great resource. I'm going to put it. I'll put it in the notes here. In addition to checking out the video that we did, I'm going to share a resource, a really great book that goes by variety. You can look up, spinach or collards or whatever, and get get a specific description on what you need to do to save seeds from those guys. Okay.
Okay. Yep. So we talked about things you should remove. This slide is just thinking about things we should keep right now. I mentioned quickly that there may be some things you're still harvesting from. So, don't feel like, especially if they're winter hardy things, don't feel like you have to yank them out yet. A lot of things can take a little frost, and so the things that can take frost are, your spinaches, your kale, your collards, those type of things are meant to, they're called cold crops, and they're meant to be able to take some cold weather. So, and oftentimes, you know, the southern farmers, or the old school farmers, don't harvest their collards at all until the frost hits them, because that frost is gonna stimulate the starches in the plant, and make for a sweeter crop. So say that to say, you know, don't feel pressure to pull those hardy things out right now. But just as kind of cautionary, we recommend removing things, because things that if you're harboring pests in your plants, then those pests are also in the soil. So just in terms of good sanitation, I think someone asked in the earlier questions, like, how do you get the diseases and the pests out of the soil? So what happens is pests can overwinter in the same bed. So you have a pest, for me right now is aphids, and, you know, they're all on my kale. And, you know, so I know in that bed next year, if I plant kale, they're going to probably have overwintered in my soil. And that is the, you know, like I mentioned, when you're gardening, everybody has their own style. A lot of people like to overwinter things or reseed things because it makes it easier. You know, kind of best practice is to just remove things, especially if you're having any pest issues, because you want to eventually get to a point where you're rotating your crops in your garden to kind of throw off your pests. So for example, with my kale, I have a lot of aphids, and so I'm going to plant it in a different area next year to kind of throw them off, if that makes sense. Yep. So perennial veggies and your flowering plants. So if you have raspberries or asparagus or things that are perennial in your garden, of course, you're going to keep those. You're going to cut your perennial plants down to ground level. That includes a lot of times your herbs. If you haven't harvested them by now, go ahead and get all your herbs out and then cut it down to ground level.
Can I add a note to that though? If they're herbaceous, if they're woody, like some things like sage, for instance, is like a woody herb. Mm-hmm. That's not that you wouldn't want to cut that one down to ground level, but like things like sorrel or chives, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you.
Lavender, woody. Yeah. There was a question here. What about lavender? Lavender would be considered a woody, so you don't need to cut that back. Can I have a few more questions here from the chat?
Sure.
So I think we kind of addressed this, but when do I need to harvest eggplant? So we were saying earlier, T was saying all those hot crops that we're going to be pulling those, you know, now is the time to get those last fruit off of those. And even if eggplant can more or less be harvested at any time, so even if they're tiny, they're still edible. And then there's another question. If we don't have our own compost pile, should the tomato, squash, and other stalks go in the city compost, or it can be left in the garden over the winter? So if you want to talk to that, T.
If you don't have your own compost pile, you know, you can, I don't know about the city's landscaping stuff. I don't know if they're taking that right now. But I mean, you can put them just like you would for your leaves and stuff like that, put them in paper bags and put them on the curb. You can put them in your neighbor's compost pile. You know, I have a space in my backyard, and it's not necessarily like a compost pile, but it's my back of my garage. there's not a lot going on. If I put stuff in there, it's going to decompose by the next year. So oftentimes I just stick stuff back there to keep it out of the garbage. Yeah, and then just a note on, this is the time that you would be dividing your perennials. I was gonna try to find a short video of this, but it's really, not a super hard concept. But if you're new to gardening, we know that there's a difference between the annuals and the perennials. So a lot of the things that we give you as transplants, they're annuals. You need to plant them every year. But perennials come back on their own every year after going, maybe through a dormant phase. In the winter, they come back on their own. And so a lot of your herbs are perennial, not all of them. A lot of your herbs are perennial in this climate, and there's a lot of perennial plants that people like, flowering plants that people use. And so this is a great time to divide them, all your hostas and your echinacea and all of the things that make your garden kind of pretty and that survive year to year. You can, what I do is take a nice spade shovel and just chop them in half and use the rest to kind of fill out different spots in my garden or share with neighbors. And then just to mention that we are still selling a lot of native plants on our online store. So if you're looking to fill out your flowering parts of your garden, check us out online. We have a lot of natives left. Wanted to talk a little bit about self-seeding, particularly because I had a couple of questions in my email, even prior to this class, for people that were interested in self-seeding. So, I mentioned that, our kind of good practice is to just remove everything because of pests and disease and wanting to get a fresh start. But in terms of nature's way, a lot of crops will self-seed themselves. We talked about saving seed, but a lot of crops will if you leave the seed on there, the seed just drops down, and then in the spring, instead of going out there and busting your butt, you have crops that are already doing that. So if you want to experiment with a little bit of that, here are some crops that do that pretty easily. So crops that pop up on their own in the spring, if you leave them alone, you let them flowered, they go on the seed, the seed drops, and they'll come back up in the spring, is arugula, the chamomile, the cilantro. Those all will do that if they flowered. If they flowered and gone to seed, they'll reseed themselves in the spring, and then they'll reseed and they'll show in spring. And then nasturtiums and zinnias will pop up in the summer. So another issue with kind of experimenting with that is you have to familiarize yourself with what their seedlings look like, so you don't weed them out in the spring or summer. So just a note on those things to keep. So in general, at this time, as definitely as a new gardener, I'm suggesting that you remove those plants that you don't want to keep going. We mentioned that that's going to help reduce disease and pest pressure for next year. And go ahead and weed your garden as much as possible, and then cover it. So here's some things that you can use to cover it. Leaves, I think Keto mentioned, you can use full leaves. They're better if you chop them up in a, I have a push mower. You can use a regular mower to chop them up, so they're kind of lighter weight. Straw, as opposed to, not straw, but what's the other thing, Keto, that people want, that has weeds, that has seeds in it? Hay. Straw, not hay. Thank you, Keto. My mind was not there with it, but A lot of people,
Hay is for
uh,
horses.
hay is for horses. It has seeds in it, and you don't want to put that in your garden necessarily. But straw is great. And some people use wood chips. There's a kind of a contention on that one, but and the contention being that wood chips draw nitrogen out of your soil, but particularly for non-vegetables, I use wood chips a lot. But the point here is that your soil is living, and you want to cover it to protect it from the harsh winters.
So a few questions here. What about ground covers? Are you talking about cover crops, maybe, Monty? Um, so yeah, so I would say it might be kind of late to plant cover crops. Um, and the upside to cover crops is they're great. Like if you have the space and the time in your garden to grow them, um, once you knock them down and they start to break down, they're great, but they take up space and time. So for those of us growing on a smaller scale in our backyards and such, I personally wouldn't recommend cover crops, because I just don't think, because they need time to grow. Like you would have planted them a month ago and nothing else, nothing edible would have been in that space. So it doesn't necessarily make sense. But there are short ones that are kind of short season, and kind of easy to do. Buckwheat would probably be the one that we would recommend the most. So just a few notes on that. So if I have a couple other questions here, if I have herbs in containers, should I move to raised bed garden over winter? I have mint, oregano, sage, chives, and thyme. Do you want to talk to that, or you want me to talk to that?
Moving the herbs to the raised bed.
So like they're in containers right now. Do you do them? What do you need to do? Do you need to do anything special with them?
I don't. I have herbs in containers and I just leave them. But
I mean, one thought is that because they're above the ground, they don't get the benefit of the thermal mass of the ground to keep the roots healthier. But especially a lot of those things are really hardy. The mint in particular, mint and all those things are really hardy. So I think, like T said, I think, it's probably fine.
Yeah. Yeah. So a lot of people don't think about it. We're kind of worn out maybe from the season, but this is a really great time to expand your garden or kind of rethink your design. So you're getting down to kind of a fresh start here, and just thinking, if you want to start a new bed, fall is a great time, because what we see is a rush in the spring, right, of activity. And spring is the time where you're trying to get your crop in, but you're also trying to establish your garden. So thinking about the long haul, just a note that, if you want to expand your garden, go ahead and cut a bed, or go ahead and build a raised bed and fill it. And that way it'll be ready for the spring. There's also a method that we, that I really like, is the lasagna method for building a raised bed. And that is, here's a picture of it here. The lasagna method is super easy, and it's a great fall activity because you have a lot of the materials at your disposal right now. So the lasagna bed is just building a bed up out of organic matter. So I would start my lasagna bed with a layer of cardboard right on top of the grass. Just throw a layer of cardboard on top of the grass, and you're gonna, exactly what the term indicates, is lasagna, different organic matters on top of each other. So you might throw a layer of compost on there. You might throw a layer of leaves. You may throw a layer of grass clippings, and all of those things. It's kind of like a compost bed right there. You layer those things up, And by the time spring comes and the winter comes, and by the time the spring comes, you have a garden bed right there. One thing is usually it takes about a year to be able to plant seeds in there, but you could definitely plant transplants in there in come spring. Also, fall is a great time to do a soil test on parts of your garden that you want to expand to. Typically, now, we had an off year with soil testing this year, but typically soil tests, the labs are flooded in the spring. So if you can sneak a test in right now, I recommend it. So I don't know who was just asking about containers, but you talked this up. Just a few notes about your containers over winter. If you're using clay pots, they tend to crack if they're left outdoors all winter. The water in them expands and then you have a cracked pot. So if whether you're using cracked pots or not, if you're doing annual things that aren't going to come back in your pots. For example, I was talking to Keto before we started about my tomato plants that I tried with the fabric pots this year. I'm going to harvest all my tomatoes. I'm going to chop up those stems, remove the roots, and I'm going to take all of the soil that's in those. This is what I'm going to do. And like I said, there's a number of ways you can do it, but I'm going to take the soil and mix it up into a large garbage tin that I have in the backyard. And that way I can start fresh. I can mix in some compost. I can mix in some more organic matter. And then if there was anything overwintering, I just kind of shake things up in terms of pests and disease. So that's my plan for containers. Do you grow in containers, Keto?
We have some, yeah. We'll do like, a pepper here. I have some like not hot habaneros and, just kind of here and there we have some containers. So yeah, same kind of thing. I usually just throw mine in a pile in the back of the garden. Mm-hmm. And maybe mix it with some shredded leaves, and that helps, that'll decompose over time and add some water holding capacity and a little more nutrients as those leaves break down. Related here, how do you keep leaves, etc., from blowing out of a raised bed if you put down that if you're putting down that layer of mulch on top? One way is just either take some native soil there and dig, and just kind of toss some soil on top, or if you have compost, just enough to like act as a weight, just tossing some compost on the top.
Yeah.
Watering them down also could help.
If you're, I don't think we mentioned this in the last slide, but if you're like my neighbors, a lot of my neighbors have the Amazon boxes, especially right now with COVID happening. Everybody's shopping at Amazon, but those cardboard boxes, you can also, I threw a lot of cardboard boxes on top of my beds and just use those to kind of buffer the cold.
And there's a question related to that. This year was our first garden in a space that had been way overgrown, so we put down cardboard topped with wood chips between our plants. Should we pull all that out or leave it down?
I would leave it.
Yeah. Just a few other kind of random questions. Is sage a self-seeding plant? I'm not sure. Maybe, but not readily. Maybe a little bit. I mean, they definitely throw down seeds, but I don't remember ever seeing volunteers. Feel free to chime in on that one. Anybody else?
But sage is perennial, right? I mean, so it's gonna be there from year to year. The self-seeding things I was more so talking about are annual, but they seem perennial because they come back in your garden. Right. But they come back because they're self-seeding themselves.
Right.
So if that makes sense. I don't know if you guys know that Keto used to be an arborist. Did you guys know that? A landscaping guy background. But trees and shrubs And Keto, I may ask you to talk about maybe
Sure.
what people can do with their fruit trees, but typically want to postpone any pruning to like February, right?
Yeah.
February, March is when you want to do your pruning. Also, they have said that like removing leaves will help you get rid of any leaf-borne disease. So kind of making a habit of that. And also, as we know, we have mice and things that like to bury in those leaves. So just kind of keeping it tidy. But any advice you have on people who are doing fruit trees for the
Yeah.
winter?
Yeah. So let's start with small fruit. So things like raspberries. Um, so it depends on the type of raspberries you have, if they're June bearing or ever bearing. But um, this applies to all trees and perennial plants. The first thing you always do is remove dead, diseased, and dying. So any kind of uh, broken, dead, brown, no leaves on it, branches, you can go ahead and cut those things out, and that really helps with getting a sense of what's going on with the plant, because it just takes out all some of the clutter, so you can get a sense of what is healthy and still there.
Mm-hmm.
And then uh, for fruit trees, or for any of these things, we can anticipate that there's going to be maybe some winter damage. So the thinking is wait to prune and shape these plants. You want to prune and shape these plants during the cold time while they are still dormant, but let the whole, basically wait, let the winter happen. Let maybe, if something, a branch dies back or this or that, and deal with that more in February. So you're not, instead, if you pruned really heavy now and then you lost even more, then that could be a problem for those plants.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so, and we did do a video on pruning, winter pruning, and I'm sure we're going to do a class again next year related to that. But the time frame is February, March. Um, mulching around the base of trees is a good idea. Generally speaking, we're trying not to leave um, barren soil. Uh, Fruit trees also, it's a good idea to have some kind of protection at the base of the trunk, some kind of tree protector, uh, because in some cases, particularly younger trees, sometimes mice will find that appealing and girdle the tree, um, and chew on the bark at the base. So that's a potential problem. There's some questions here about things like tender perennial things like figs. Um,
Yeah.
so hold on a second. So uh, those are things that you want to give some kind of protection, whether that, if it's in the ground, then there's some strategies around like making a wire mesh cage around the plant and then packing it with leaves. Um, Basically those things can do okay in a mild winter, but if we are going to have a hard winter, then that could be an issue with um, winter damage. They prefer actually a little bit warmer climate than ours. If it's in a container, then you can try and protect it in a garage. Um, in terms of starting seedlings indoors, um, so I would say in terms of planting anything new, um, I would not necessarily recommend planting anything new. We're getting to be a little bit late for that. T had mentioned at the beginning of the talk for generally growing things new in the ground, like the spinach, kale, collards. We might be able to get those things started, and with a little bit of protection, be harvesting them in the spring. But our season is winding down there. And then there's a question here about fertility for fruit trees. You could do some kind of some fertility, but you would do that more in the spring than in the fall. So no fertilizer for the fall time.
Mhm. Okay, we talked a little bit about this. Your compost pile, I think only thing we didn't mention is to, of course, make sure you have a good mix of things. So if you're adding a bunch of, old spent plants, make sure you're getting in some, maybe some food waste or something to balance out all of that carbon. We know we need a mix of greens and browns in there, and then if you, as you're starting to stockpile, if you want to go ahead and start a new pile in the fall, make sure you're watering it well as you're building. Fall is also a good time for tool maintenance. So we've done in the past, and maybe I don't know, maybe we should do a quick video on tool maintenance. But we've done classes in the past. We've helped people, I think we've had people come sharpen tools and stuff like that. But generally is a great time as we're winding down, starting the season fresh, grab a wire brush, scrape off the stuff off your shovels. If you have stuff with wood handles, maybe throw some linseed on it, throw some linseed on your raised beds, or you do that in the spring. It's a good time to sharpen things like pruners and loppers. Make sure all your spigots are shut down, make sure you're wrapping up all your hoses. Just a reminder for that kind of things, particularly with folks with larger spaces. And then I think this is the last slide. So somebody mentioned the fig, and there are a few more tender things. And when we say tender versus hardy. So hardy things can take the frost, and tender things don't do well when the temperatures get super cold. And so, if you're a flower type of person and you got some of these type of bulbs here that are what they consider tender, you'll need to clip those down, pull the bulbs out, let them air dry, and bring the bulbs in each year for some of these more tender plants. And I am, making a push as always to consider indoor growing. Keto, I don't know how you feel about it. I'd love to do something about with some grow lights and things, just to just encourage people to be doing the most they can. Times are crazy with COVID and food shortages and everything. We all should be as diligent as possible about growing as much as we can right now, especially those folks who have an interest in it. So think about, right now be investing in extra containers or potting soil. Think about, if you don't already have a grow light system, maybe it's time to invest in that. Some of the things that you could start growing indoors, and these things would be with the lights, especially if you have one of those either a southern facing window with a light might be a nice spot. But things like lettuce and arugula or sprouts, we did a class on that last year. Just something to think about to push your envelope a little bit if you're not already growing indoors. I think that's my last slide. Yeah.
Can I add a little bit to that? So I think it's great to try and grow some of these things indoors, but just to kind of give a little bit more of guidance about like what's going to work out best for you. The lights work best for young growth, or with the intention of either growing, harvesting things When they're really tiny, like they're microgreens, or just beyond that, like they're sprouts. Um, and it's going to work best for things that like are leafing for the most part, like you see on T's list here: lettuce, arugula, anything green. Any of those sprouts are great edible. You could do collard sprouts, you could do kale sprouts, you could do spinach sprouts, all of those, the lettuce mix, the all greens mix. um, but just trying to grow tomatoes under lights, for instance, uh, without like some serious light setups that are expensive and high powered and all that, it's not going to work out too great for you. So I would tend to encourage people to do things that are like leafing greens, intended to be harvested when they're small, and that's probably going to work out just great for you. If you like sunflower sprouts, super nutritious. Those are relatively easy to grow. There's definitely some good resources out there, but that's something to play around with. You can grow whole flats of those and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sunflower sprouts are great. Add them to your sandwich. Eat them like popcorn. Any rate, something I always just encourage people to experiment and try things, and that's part of gardening. If there aren't any final questions, this is the end of the PowerPoint. We can just answer some general questions or stay on the line for folks who have specific questions about their garden for a little while. But I think we're at the end of the PowerPoint.
Okay, so a few questions here. Let's see. We have some burning bushes to hide our bees. Will our time bees be at risk planting them this week? You should be, if you just bought some burning bushes to put by your bees, they should be fine. I mean, planting perennial bushes. It's actually it's actually a good point. This is a really great time to go out to the garden centers and see what's for sale. Like, you can get a lot of perennials for cheap. This is a really great time of year to do that. And planting this stuff, even if it looks kind of like junk, it looks kind of beat up or whatever, find a good spot for it. It'll most likely come through and be just fine.
Mm-hmm. Who said that? I'm going to add that to the PowerPoint. I like that.
That was Cindy.
Yeah, nice, Cindy. Great point.
So let's see. Can I grow sunflower sprouts from seeds I get in the grocery store? I know that there's a particular variety that grows sunflower sprouts the best, that the name is escaping me right now. I want to say it was like some gray was in the name, but it's worth a try. I think they probably still do pretty reasonable. Do we offer help designing garden layouts? We can probably help you talk through things. Yeah, for sure. It would be either hollering at T, myself, or Lindsay, I believe. So either way, just if you drop a line to the info@keepgrowingdetroit email, and at Gmail, info@keepgrowingdetroit.org, and we'll connect you with somebody who can give some guidance. Can you start the greens indoors for planting in March? Yes, that's a great idea. Catherine's highlighting that also there's sales on garden tools and supplies this time of year, so stay tuned for that. There's been a few notes about harvesting for those who are at the ginger and turmeric class in the spring, the last class that we did before COVID hit.
Was that the last class?
Now is the time. We're getting ready to harvest ours at the farm. But yeah, so it's about time to be harvesting that.
You know, don't forget, we got to get a video of that.
Yeah, we will for sure. And I think that's it. Okay. A bunch of thank yous, and thank you guys for coming out today. We had a nice sized group, and that makes us happy. So we'll see you on the flip. Stay tuned for some great classes coming up. Yeah, we got some great cooking classes coming up. So stay tuned.
Yep, and the planning, garden planning class in November is always rocking.
Yes.
I'll be there myself with notes.
Yes. Stay tuned for a great garden planning class later in November. Okay, guys, go harvest those tomatoes and eggplants and everything.
See you guys later. Take care, Guido.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.